Good to see all of you this morning. I want to begin this class in a way that I have never done at any time in my life. Through about 40 years of preaching and teaching a class, I have never done what I'm about to do. And that is, I'm going to sing you a chorus. Now, there's a reason for why I haven't sung before. I will never be accused of, Don, you're really gifted in singing, you know. That will never come up. So I don't want you to listen to the tone quality of my voice or the enunciation ability. I want you to listen to the words. Now, the chorus is significant, especially to Dieter and I, because when we became Christians in 10th grade, this chorus was one of the first worship songs that we learned. And I still remember those days. This song has been used in this church. So for those of you that know it, you're welcome to sing along with me. Okay? Here it is. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ears. The title of this class is Learning the Love Language of God. So our time together is about putting more meat on that bone, if you please, in regards to our devotion and our love expression to the Lord God Himself. There's been much said about the idea of loving in recent years, of how that's received, what we do to express it, how it's received. I want you to think about this for a moment. When you say, I love you, what all does that convey? Now, that might be a parent to a child or a child to a parent, could be a spouse, could be somebody, brother or sister in the church. I love you. What all does that mean? So an opening illustration would be this. I get a couple comes into my office. I say to them, why are you here? The wife speaks up and she says, we're both here because my husband doesn't love me. Well, how long have you been married? 20 years. Well, what makes you say that your husband doesn't love you? She holds back a little bit, and the husband speaks up and says, I do love her. He says, every single holiday throughout the entire calendar year, I make a special trip to go buy flowers and bring them home to her, and I don't buy the same flowers. I get different flowers throughout the year, and I bring a bouquet that she finds it. And I do it as a surprise for her every single time. She wakes up, or she's in the kitchen, she comes in and she finds these flowers. So I look to the woman and I say, well, is that true? And she says, yeah, that's true. But I am allergic to flowers. The man speaks up and says, well, that's not all. I also, periodically, I bring her home chocolates for her. Not only for her birthday, but also throughout the year when she's least expecting it. I have her come in, she sees a package wrapped up, and there are chocolates. And they're all different kinds throughout the year. And I turn to her and I say, Is that true? And she says, yes. She said, it is true. But Pastor Don, I have diabetes. I'm not supposed to be eating chocolate. The man interjects again, and he says, well, yeah, but I also deliberately, as in my schedule, every single Friday night, I take her out with me and we go to the movies. We have dinner, we go to the movies every single Friday. It's a date night that we've had when our kids were younger. We continue it now that they're gone. And she says, I said to her, well, is this true? And she says, yes, it is. She said, but I have an eye condition that I can't see in dark places, and when there's all light on one wall, all I see are images there. When I go to the movies, what I basically do is just listen, but I can't see it. Now, I give you that illustration because it's obvious that in this illustration, it's obvious that the man does not know his wife. He thinks he knows her, but he doesn't know her. You think about it, it's a little over-accentuated here. 20 years this is going on. But I think you get the point here. Now, this leads into this idea of love languages. There are certain things that studies have been made that people receive or acknowledge the acts of love in different ways. For example, some people really like to receive gifts. They really like that. It really means something to them when they recognize that someone spent time, they went out, they bought this item for them, they wrapped it, brought it home. It really means a lot to them. There are other people that look at it and say, no, that's not really for me. That wouldn't be it. I really like when someone takes the time and writes me a note. You know, they actually just basically write a note out, and I find it, or it comes in the mail, and it indicates that they love me. And they took the time to do that. They put a stamp on it, they put a return address on it, they put it in the mail. And still there are others that would say, you know, the most significant thing for me is when someone wants to spend time with me. You know, they just want to go for a walk and talk. People have different love languages. In fact, there's books that are written about this. What I'm starting off with is asking this question: what is the love language of God? What is it that, you know, really has meaning to him? Well, there's a lot of things that we do as Christians, as I think representative of our love for him. We write checks out, don't we? We give to the work of the kingdom. We do those things. We come on Sunday morning. We lift up songs of praise and worship. We listen to the Word of God being preached. There's a whole host of things that we do, including maybe times of prayer. Worship is a big factor. I want you to listen to the words of the prophet Amos in regards to this. These are words that are spoken to the nation of Israel. These are the people of God. These are the ones that know about the worship of God. And in Amos chapter 5, beginning at verse 21, we read these words. God speaking. I hate and I reject your festivals, nor do I delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me up burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. and I will not even look at the peace offerings of your fatlings. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not even listen to the sound of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. The love language of God is when we're in the process of doing what it is that God's called us to do. And in order to understand that, we get the point here is that God has given us His law to guide us in that. Now, to understand this and make sure that we're understanding the interface between the law and the gospel, I have several introductory classes that we're going to go through before we even examine the Ten Commandments. We've got to understand that in obeying the law of God, we're not earning our salvation. That's not the case. But if we ask the question, well, what is it that turns God's crank? What is it that He really delights in? You know, is it the note? Is it the check that we write? Is it the worship songs? It's all these other things. They all have meaning if there's something there in regards to loving what God Himself loves, which is His law. Now, one of those introductory classes, we're going to spend a lot of time delineating, well, what law are we talking about? You know, we have the ceremonial law in the Old Testament. We have the case law that was delivered to Israel. And, of course, we have the moral law, the Ten Commandments, which is what this class is about. I will break that all down for you in the weeks ahead. But what I want to at least introduce to you today is the idea that the Ten Commandments are near and dear to God because they are indicative of His nature. Consider it. Thou shalt not commit adultery. God is the altogether faithful one. Thou shalt not covet. God has no desire to covet anything because He owns all. Thou shalt not bear false witness. God cannot lie. It's not a part of His nature. If we work through each one of those commandments, what we find is this is part of a description of the nature of God. And when we walk in accordance with that, that is a way of expressing our love to Him so that when we do sing, when we do pray, when we do write the check, when we go and serve, when we sit in a prayer group, it has greater meaning, to quote Jesus on this point, if you love me, keep my commands. See, there's the meat on the bone. And that's why the context for this class is actually devotion to the Lord God, putting meaning behind, I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice. See, this is it. This is what puts meaning into it. So having said that, let me begin this way in regards to introducing the moral law to you. And once again, when I use the phrasing here, the moral law, that is a synonym for the Ten Commandments, which were delivered to Moses. We find it in Exodus chapter 20. It's restated again in a sermon by Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 5. But what's interesting about this to begin with is there is a universal presence of the moral law around the globe. And it's particularly of interest for this class that it is present in cultures that have not been touched by Christianity, that have not been touched by Judaism, nor have been touched by Islam. This has led many scholars to lay out one of the reasons, one of the assertions for the existence of God is the moral law argument, which basically says you find evidences of the moral law universally on all four corners of the earth, even in these cultures that haven't been touched by the three major religions that recognize them as being authoritative. Why is that? Why is it that in every single culture, stealing is always regarded as wrong? Even if it's epidemic in the culture, it is still not seen as a good thing. Or how about this? Honor your mother and father. In all cultures around the globe, the understanding has always been that parents are in authority over their children. And they make decisions for and about their children because they're in authority there. And that rebellion to a parent is dangerous because being rebellious to a parent indicates they may also be rebellious to every other authority figure that's in their life. The police, the teachers at school, and others that are in power over them, including their employer. Everywhere you find that. Thou shalt not commit adultery. It's present everywhere. There isn't a culture on the planet that basically says, well, you know, adultery is a good thing. Everybody, at least once a year, ought to be involved in adultery. Even in cultures where it is legitimate for me to have 6 wives, it is not legitimate for me to take a 7th who is my neighbor's wife. Where did that come from? In all cultures, thou shalt not bear false witness. Lying is always disregarded. Truth is always upheld. Private ownership. Thou shalt not steal. In all cultures, it's wrong to take something that is not your own. There's not a culture on the planet that basically says, well, we're just all going to live, what's yours is mine, what mine is yours. I mean, we have this kind of thinking. Sometimes you find it in socialistic kinds of understandings of the world. It doesn't work. It's always understood that there is private ownership. And there is this global effect that's here. And I think this is what Paul is after in Romans chapter 1. You go through Romans, it's basically the first 15 verses are salutary remarks. When you get to verse 16 of chapter 1, he's basically asserting the body of the letter. And he begins this way, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jews first, and also to the Greeks. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the righteous man shall live by faith. That's the good news. That is the good news, and that's the good news of the beginning of that letter. But he then goes into the problem, which begins 2 verses later, and then continues all the way through chapter 3 as he begins to lay out his indictment against humanity for its rebellion against God. And he begins this way, and he says, shifting from the gospel, he moves to wrath. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness and ungodliness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. And then he lays out his reasoning as it goes from that point. He made it evident within them, for God made it evident to them. How is that? The moral law is embedded into the psyche of man. This is part of the moral law argument for the existence of God. Again, you can't go anywhere on the planet where you don't find evidences of those moral law codes. And I have never heard a secularist come up with a good definition or a reason for why that's apparent, if they're atheists or whatever. Why is it that wherever you go, these laws are apparent? Paul's point here is they suppress the truth. What truth? They know these things intrinsically. It's wrong to steal your neighbor's things. They know it's wrong to steal your neighbor's wife. They know not telling the truth is wrong, but mankind does it anyway. And so what do they do with that pain that's there? I'm not doing what I should be doing. They suppress the truth. The Greek there carries with it the idea of to incarcerate the truth. Who suppress the truth and unrighteousness. They incarcerate the truth. How do we flush that out? Well, the way I've illustrated it in the past has been, it's almost like the truth of God is a gigantic coil that is pushing up. And you have mankind draped over that and pushing with all of his might to hold it down. R.C. Sproul and many other theologians have pointed out that suppression is one of the things why people have so many psychological issues. And we all know this, don't we? We all know there are places we've been we should have never been, right? Things we've done we shouldn't have done. I mean, this is what makes the gospel great, right? That we turn to God and ask for forgiveness of our sins, and those places and things that we've done or what we said or talked about or thought, I mean, all that is forgiven. But if you don't have Christ, you got to live with that every day. And this is Paul's point as he is beginning this indictment, a broadside being fired into the humanity of man, that there's a problem here. See, the gospel doesn't make sense unless we understand the problem. What's good about the good news if you don't understand what the bad news is? The bad news is we're all depraved. And when God made this statement to Adam in the garden, he made it very clear, in the day you eat of this fruit, you shall surely, I thought it was, you shall surely become sick. Are you sure? Vicki, are you sure? Okay, Vicki's sure. What's the difference between being sick and being dead? If you're sick, you can, with your last amount of energy within your body, crawl across the floor, reach up with your last bit of strength, grab your phone, and dial 911. But if you're dead, you don't do anything. In fact, you don't even know you're dead. You know, I've mentioned this in places in the past, different classes, that my first encounter with death was when I was 16 years old, and my grandmother was very ill. She was in the hospital. I was with my dad that whole day. We went there in the hospital in the morning, saw her. We're there for a while, and then we left. We had errands to run, and then the word came back. Things were getting worse. We went back to the hospital. So I was there. I was there with my father, his brother, and their two aunts, both twins. And I was the only young person that was there. And I was watching her die. And I still remember those moments. And I was not a believer at this point. And I remember the priest being present there. And I remember her calling out and saying, "Father, are you helping me?" Remember that. And as time wore on, another 45 minutes, maybe an hour or so, she eventually died. And then I went with my dad and all those aunts and uncle to the funeral home. It was at that point that they selected a casket. They talked about who was going to do her hair, what she was going to wear. A day or so went by, maybe 2 days, and then was the viewing for the family. First time I'd ever been to a viewing. So I go walking in there, and the casket was open. My grandmother was there, and the aunts and uncles, they were all there walking up to the casket and crying. And I remember my two aunts, that they reached into that casket and grabbed hold of her. They wanted to hug her, you know? And so everybody was in a line that had the opportunity to go up to the casket. And so I was just following along. And I remember going up to that casket and looking at her, and I do remember, I mean, they had prepared her well. I mean, she really did look like my grandmother. She had died of cancer. I didn't feel inclined to hug her, but I thought, I want to kiss her. So I bent down and I kissed her on the forehead. That is a moment in my life that cannot be erased. Because when I kissed her and my lips touched her forehead, it was like kissing a cold piece of steel. And I think my lips went down, and then my eyes were like saucers for a moment or two, realizing there was no life in her body. She was dead. She was dead. This is the language that's used in the scripture regarding mankind. In the day you eat of this fruit, you shall surely die. Right? That is it in Genesis 3, as we know the story. It obviously didn't mean that he would immediately die, because Adam and Eve did not. But something happened spiritually. Something was different. And the symptoms of that immediately show up in the garden scene. You know, we have it. God comes on the picture. He comes through the garden. Adam recognizes that, runs away. God confronts him. Where are you? I was afraid of you. First symptom. I was fearful. Why? There's all of a sudden, there's estrangement there. Something spiritually happened. In the past, God's presence was there. Adam was going towards him. Now God's presence is there. He's moving away from him. Something changed. Everything was different. I was afraid. I was afraid. Yes?
If the spirit is dead, what is left that senses anything? Why would you care to suppress the truth if the spirit is dead?
All right, I'll do all that. So we've got this symptom here then of they're fearful of God. There's a sense then, well, have you eaten of the tree, which I told you not to eat? Of course, God knew this. And Adam says, well, yeah, it's the woman. It's the woman you gave me. What he's saying there is, this is not my fault. This is your fault. Now God is an enemy of man. That was new. Everything was new. So something changed, and that is this, that in the day you eat of this fruit, you shall surely die. Spiritually, he died. The part of the soul that relates to God became a corpse. There's a break of the fellowship that's there. And then there's that scene where they're ejected from the garden. I have preached on this elsewhere. They're ejected from the garden, and there's a sense there which they didn't want to go. Now you have to answer that question. Well, why wouldn't they want to go? You would think if you're afraid of God, you'd want to get out of there. That's not what it says. It says that the Spirit of God drove them out of the garden. Why would that be? And it's this. Even though dead, mankind wants the blessings of God, but he doesn't want God. The garden was safety. The garden represented food. There was going to be hard work on the outside, thorns and thistles that's going to grow. We want to stay put. Well, no, you're out. They're out, and then an angel is placed at the gate with a flaming sword. What's the imagery there? The idea is there is no way in man's efforts he's getting back into that garden. Stated differently, there are no amount of works that one might do to enable to get back in there. There's not a ladder big enough to scale the wall. There's not a sword big enough to go one-on-one with that angel. Can't be done. Now, to Sue's point, she's asking here, well, if they're spiritually dead, why would there be, let me say it again.
If they're dead, what is in a person that cares about?
Okay. If you're dead, okay. So if they spiritually died, why would there be any interest at all? Which is interesting when you think about it in this way. Religion is universal, isn't it? I mean, no matter where you go on in the world, you're going to find all these different religious systems. I mean, the major religions like Islam or Hinduism, Shinto, it goes on, and then there are all these little subcategories of various things that people worship. I mean, you find that everywhere. If someone's dead, then why would there be any interest, is Sue's question. And the answer to that is, there's interest there because intuitively men and women know that there is a God. This is the picture of the kid who runs around and does whatever they want to do, but when they become afraid, they start feeling around for their mother's leg. They need to be comforted with the idea, he's there, but on my terms. Karen.
Well, what just came up in my mind, we are still made in the image of God. And is there a remnant of God's image? It's just a fallen, tainted image.
That's exactly right. And to where we are, that moral code, if you have a moral code, you have a moral law giver.
So it's in your head then? Does intuition come from your head, from your psyche?
It's within your, I'm going to put your mind in your soul, okay? The spiritual part of that soul is broken with God. But the remnants of it, knowledge that there is a God, that I'm not living the way He wants me to live, and it comforts me to know that there is a God. And so, I will make a God that I want. And what do we call that?
Idolatry.
Idolatry. Yes, Bob.
You may be getting to this, but also in that phrase that God says, in the day of you will eat, when He casts them out, He says, we do that to keep them from eating of the tree of life and living. And so, there is a sense of immortality in man, in Adam, provisionally, in the sense of the tree of life. If they had stayed in the garden, they would never have died. They would have continued
to live,
even in their sin.
Right.
They would continue in immortality. And so, you may mention this later, but Adam lives to be like 190 something. No, 900. So in one of the apocryphal books, it explains that by saying a day in the Lord is as 1,000 years. 1,000 years is as a day. So in the Jewish mind, Adam lived shy of a day. He died in a day. the day of the Lord, the 1,000 years. He died short of that. And so death was coming provisionally because they got kicked out of the garden. And so death was coming. And so we were in this decaying, well, not decaying, well, yeah, I guess decaying process, because death is decay.
Okay, so let me make it this way. So when we talk about, in the day you eat of this fruit, you shall surely die, the death we're speaking of is twofold. A, spiritually, was immediate. Immediately, it changed. Fear of God, blame game, it's the woman, well, even more than that, it's the woman you gave me, it's God. That's the problem there. Okay, that's immediate. But once they ate of that, physically, they would begin to die. That eventually their bodies would give way to disease. Christianity is answering a question. Why is it that men and women, the older they become, their bodies deteriorate, they cease to function the way they were originally made, and oftentimes they succumb to disease? Why is that? It's because of the fall. And even as believers, all of you know this, we are not insulated from that decay of the body. That's why the hope of the New Testament, which is given repeatedly, you will have a new body. Okay? It will be redone. But the body has been corrupted as a result of what happened in the fall. So spiritually, immediate effects. Physically, it would take time. And interestingly enough, Bob mentioned the length of time that Adam lived, 900 plus years. So as time moves forward, you got these people that are living really long, and those at interval lifespan, it continually gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Okay? It's, again, emphasizing this idea of decay. Why is it that things decay? Why is it that they deteriorate? They deteriorate because of the effects of the fall. Now, regarding our class, that moral law, Sue, is embedded in the soul. This is why, even though dead, there's the idea that thou shalt not steal is present. And there's also been the idea that you're accountable. Now, here's the part. You're accountable to the gods. Okay? There's the sense of something is higher that's holding you accountable. Which is interesting even on our dollar bills. In God we trust. Someone is looking down. Where's a hand up? Vicki.
I just was going to say, even when I was dead in my sins, I wanted benefits.
Say that again.
When I was dead in my sin, I still wanted benefits. If there was anything God wanted to offer, I'd go for it.
Yeah, let's take it. I mean, we all want that. Hold on a second. Even though dead, and isn't that the way it is? I mean, you find people, I want the sun to shine on me. I want it to be on my kids. I want water in its season. I want the crops to grow. I want it to all be good, right? And when it's not, people often become bitter. And who are they bitter at? Oftentimes it's God. Bob.
In the same vein that you say the law of God is embedded in us, the idea that we're potentially immortal is embedded in us. Gilgamesh, as you know, the first thing he wanted to do was find his immortality. He's going hunting for that.
Yes.
Like he expected it. And then even secularists today, who have no belief in God, no belief in the supernatural, want to live forever.
Yeah.
They want to live longer.
Yeah, even if you have to take my brain and encase it in cryogenics and freeze it. Yeah, that's true. I mean, they all have this sense. And of course, today, in order to get there, all you need to do is to die, because all dogs go to heaven, all human beings, they die, they go to be to heaven. That's the sense. Now, I want to still drive home, with the minutes I have left, this point of the embedding of this in the soul of man, even after the fall. All right? Let me give you some examples of this. Job chapter 1, verse 5. Listen. when the days of feasting had completed their cycle, Job would send and consecrate them. He's talking about his kids here. Rising up early in the morning and offering burnt offerings according to the number of them, that's his kids. For Job said, perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. Question: how did Job know what is sin? Now, I've and elsewhere tried to make the case that I think the first biblical book written is the book of Job. There's a lot of reasons for that. If you're interested in that, ask me afterwards. But, Moses writes, we have all this information about Genesis, which obviously predates Job, but he's writing that much later. It's a history of the world. And I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Job is likely the first book written. I'm asking the question, how did he know what was sin? How did he know that? It was present within his mind. Perhaps my sins have, I keep getting this wrong. Perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. How did he know about cursing God? Or how about this? Later on, all you Covenant Eyes employees. Job 31, verse 1. I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? How did Job know that it would be wrong to lust for a young woman? Where did he get that idea? See, thou shalt not commit adultery. That includes all of the sexual sins. It was present there. How about this one? Job 31, beginning at verse 9. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or I have lurked at my neighbor's doorway, may my wife grind for another, and let others kneel down over her, for that would be a lustful crime. Moreover, it would be an iniquity punishable by the judges, for it would be fire that consumes and abandon, and would uproot all of my increase. How did Job know that it would be wrong to be lusting for his neighbor's wife? Thou shalt not commit adultery. Sinai is hundreds of years later. That's where Moses received the law. So what's going on here? What happened at Sinai was that God wrote the laws down. But prior to Sinai, they were already written into men and women's hearts. They knew. How about this? Later on, Abraham, picking up chapter 12 of the book of Genesis. It came about when he came near Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, see now, I know that you are a beautiful woman. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me. But they will let you live. Please say that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you. Ladies, this sounds like somebody you want to be married to, right? It came about when Abram came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Okay, she's going to become part of the harem at this point. Therefore, he treated Abram well for her sake, and gave him sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with a great plague because Sarai was Abram's wife. Then Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you not say, she was my sister, so that I may take her as a wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him that they escorted him away with his wife and all that belonged to him. How did Pharaoh know that it would be wrong to take another man's wife? Moses didn't come down off of Sinai yet. We're well ahead of that. And yet, this pagan king knew that was the reason for the plague. It happens again. Genesis chapter 20. Now Abraham journeyed from there toward the land of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned at Gerar. Abraham said of Sarah his wife, she is my sister. You know, we're not doing good here. You know, strikeout number one, strikeout number two. I mean, things are not going well here. So Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream of the night and said to him, behold, you are a dead man because of this woman whom you have taken, for she is married. Now Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, will you slay a nation even though blameless? Did he not himself say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this. Then God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that in the integrity of your heart you have done this, and I also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Okay? Well, I didn't let you go all the way so that we'd have adultery happen here and fornication. I prevented it. Listen to this pagan king, though. In the innocences of my hands, I've done this. He said she was his sister. She said, I am his sister. And now he's in trouble. How did he know this before Moses came down with the Ten Commandments written in stone? The answer is, it was written in his heart. There's a generational problem there, though, here. Abraham did this. Here comes the son, Isaac. Genesis 26, selected portions. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Now this is a different Abimelech, not the same one. It's different. The Lord appeared to him, and Abimelech was a very common name among pagan kings. And the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all the lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens. I will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So Isaac lived in Gerar, and when the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, she is my sister. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. For he was afraid to say, my wife, thinking the men of that place might kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful. It came about when he had been there a long time that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out through a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was caressing his wife Rebekah. Then Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, certainly she is your wife. How then did you say she's my sister? And Isaac said to him, because I said I might die on account of her. And Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you have brought this guilt upon us. Okay, now in this case, there's no plague. Here we have a pagan king outside of the Abrahamic line. We're hundreds of years before Sinai, and this king knows this is a sin to sexually be involved with some other man's wife. And he knew it. My closing point on this is this. This is the moral law. This is what this class is about. It is a love language to God, and it is universal. It is known throughout the world and present. And we even in our own scriptures have examples of its presence long before it was uttered by God himself and written by the finger of God on stones. And this is what your neighbors who are unbelievers, they have it as well. But in sin, we, prior to Christ, and them, still lost, suppress the truth. Why would I suppress it? Because it's painful to me. I'm ashamed. We're all ashamed. It's another carryover from the garden. We're all ashamed because we know we've done things, said things, been places, uttered things. I mean, the list goes on and on. We're all ashamed. It's painful. Hold it down. And like all of us that are going to go into a job interview, no one walks into the boss basically in the interview and says, well, you know, I tend to be lazy. I don't want to get up until like 10 o'clock in the morning. But after that, I'll be here. No one does that. We always want to put our best foot forward. Let me tell you about all the things that I can do for you. And here's my work experience. Here's this. Here's that. We lead with all of these things. But in truth, God sees it all. No matter how much we try to suppress it, we know that we know that we know that we know that God sees it. And for those of us that are believers, this is what makes every day a great day. That because of the Lord Jesus Christ dying on a cross for all of that shame and sin in my life, I can hold my head up. I'm a son of God. Not by virtue of anything I've done, but by virtue of everything He has done. Take that with you this week. See you next Sunday.